Hey all, Mac here. I wanted to give myself 1 week to make a build that could take on all the content in Path of Exile before I headed off to school. Now, this build is Frostblade Slayer, and it is originally concepted by Rutu. I highly recommend you go and check out his Twitch, and he's put a lot of effort into making this build accessible to new players as well as to veteran players, to players who are good at gearing, bad at gearing. Basically, a lot of effort. And he has a much more in-depth guide for early game options for this build. Because the league is already a weekend, I am going to be focusing more on transitionary and late game options for scaling this build. I think that if you are wanting to check out how to play this maybe in the next league start, please go and check out his videos or his channel. He has a lot of good explanations. But with that out of the way, please don't be intimidated by the length of this guide. It is primarily focusing on endgame, but it is still covering some of those early game options just so people have that information accessible from me as well. So, without further ado, hope you guys enjoy.
There's no beauty without ends. No creation with no ends. And no silent wish will cast aside our pain, distancing side by side in vain. Reflecting no more anguish by your side, a contradiction worthy to abide. Remnants of us ebb and flow, a glimpse of love just waiting. There's no rightness and pretend. Finding comfort once again. Wish the days would pass, just yearning for faith. Yet there is solace to be found within dismay. Disowning feelings of grief through these tides, a complicated love
feet, why don't you turn around and let me get a view from there and see what the field of view looks like. You're backing into the cable.
Alright, so first and foremost, let's understand how this build scales. So Slayer has an ascendancy node called Masterful Form, which tells us that our maximum endurance charges are equal to our maximum frenzy charges, and it also gives you +1 frenzy. This is an extremely powerful node because of the changes made to endurance charges, giving us 4% LEDR and the continued PDR. If you actually look at my stats, I am at 90% PDR with no armor, and this is because I have 11 endurance charges. I'll get more into the scaling of this later in the endgame gearing setup and build guide. However, just to let you understand, scaling frenzy charges is in turn going to scale our defenses, and that is the key to this build. Alright guys, so first and foremost, you need to level a character. So if you're playing this build, you're going to need to level a duelist, which is notorious for being annoying to level. And all I can say for attack skill leveling is you really want a good weapon. How you're going to be getting through the axe with a Slayer duelist is you're going to be playing a two-handed axe for Frostblades. There is a more detailed guide again up on Rue's channel. You should go and check that out. But there are also clips of him explaining it, as well as a POV on his spreadsheet. So please check that out if you want more detailed guides. If you're more comfortable with it, I'll just give you the gist, which is to path towards things like axe nodes and two-handed nodes and attack nodes. And that's really it. You are going to be playing like an elemental trinity build in order to level it, as this gives you access to a lot more damage as long as you are able to roll the correct element damage types for trinity support. But besides this, you're going to be pretty fast leap slamming around with Frostblink, and this should carry your leveling speed for the most part through the axe. You're going to be transitioning to a dagger once you get into the later white maps. Alright, so once you get enough currency from the early white maps, the priority purchase is going to be White Wind, assuming you have all your reses sorted out. White Wind is going to give you a nice boost to spell suppression, which is anywhere from 30 to 40%, as well as 100 to 200% increased cold damage. And this is on the conditional basis that you don't have anything in your offhand. And while having a shield is really nice, White Wind does provide two stats that are incredibly important for damage and for defensives. Getting close to 40% spell suppression from one item is absurd. And this weapon alone also has quite a decent bit of flat damage and attack speed, so it feels pretty comfy to play with. You can literally take this item through all your Void Stones, and even further beyond that. But nevertheless, beyond that item, you are going to be looking at either Perseverance or a Belt of the Deceiver in your belt slot, or you can play a rare belt, though Perseverance is kind of nice as it does give you Onslaught during Fortification. This belt is generally pretty cheap even earlier on, but Belt of the Deceiver gives you Intimidate if you'd like to go for that instead and run a Silver Flask. As far as boots go, there's the option of Dark Ray Vectors. These give you +1 Frenzy, and while they're a little bit above a couple Chaos early on in the league, I do believe that now they are basically worthless and you can just buy them for scraps, and they are a really good option before you get Ralakeshes. As far as every other piece of gear, it's just going to be rares that you find early on, and you'll start making transitionary upgrades once you get more currency moving into yellow and red maps. Assuming you're able to craft a little bit with your rare gear, or at least use the currency you find to purchase better gear, you're going to be making smooth transitions into red maps, especially if you can be spell suppressed. So now let's get to the meat of gearing. When do you start making transitional changes? Well, once you enter the sort of farming loop of the game in red maps, ideally T16s, you are going to be looking for several primary upgrades. First is going to be Heat Shiver, and Heat Shiver is going to give you Ignite. And this item is generally pretty cheap. Early on in the league, it was around 50 to 60 C. It shot up to a div when everybody else was making their upgrades to this item, and it went back down, and now it's sitting at around 10 C. It's very affordable now. However, getting an early one just meant that your Frostblades was able to kill a bit more consistently, instead of having to rely solely on the ground effect. But I didn't find that to be much of an issue early on anyways, so it's not a required item, but it does give you a decent bit of extra damage. Now, afterwards, you really want to be saving up for a Ralakesh's. As far as the gloves go, once you get access to Southbounds, that's what you're going to want to play, and Southbounds will carry you as long as you need. You frankly don't even need to switch them out, but there are several other options that I do feel are better late game. Ralakesh's are priority. These pair of boots have shot up in terms of price and power because they simply just give you maximum endurance frenzy power charges. You don't have to build them up anymore, so you don't have a ramp time. And at the end of the day, you'll still get move speed from the tree. So Ralakesh's is extremely crucial for this build. They're currently sitting at around 18 divines. They were higher earlier, but this is really something that you want to be saving up for. Without this, the build can feel a little bit sluggish on bosses and single target, as you're going to need to ramp up a lot of damage. Alright, so along with Ralakesh's, you're also going to be getting Arden's Anguish. This just gives you brutal charges equal to endurance charges, and because we have a node called Disciple of the Unyielding, we get 1 minimum brutal charges, which allows us to generate them. How we generate them is through killing or through Enduring Cry on bosses, and the effects of these are that they give you a chance to triple your damage on a hit, and they also give you increased stun threshold, which is very crucial for this build considering we have a smaller pure life pool than other builds, and thus it's not really a reliable defensive layer in and of itself. However, the stun threshold does allow you to kind of avoid getting stunned if you have enough charges. Besides that, after you get Ralakesha set up, you are going to want to look to swapping to a claw. One other item worth noting now is the Admiral's Arrogance. So Admiral's Arrogance is going to be a really good endgame item if you can get Frenzy charges on it. If not, Frenzy Southbounds is probably going to perform better, but you will have some ramp time for your Rage, and you may need to take Rage nodes on your tree. Saving the skill points on your tree can be a massive boost to your damage, and honestly, losing the flat damage from Southbound is not actually that bad considering these gloves give attack speed, as well as +3 level of all melee skill gems. Now, all melee skill gems actually got scaling bonuses, and their effectiveness of added damage is scaled through their levels now, so any added damage just gains more value the more levels you have. Level scaling for these attack builds is actually a thing now, so I do recommend these pair of gloves. They're obviously very expensive right now with Max Frenzy, but it is still something worth saving up for as a sort of min-maxing investment. Alright, so once you get comfortable using your Ralakesh's and you have a decent amount of currency, I would look into crafting a claw. Do note that you also want to craft a decent shield and body armor that both have suppression, or take more suppression nodes on the tree should you run a claw, because you're going to be losing the 30 to 40% from White Wind. Now for the claw, I'll go over this in the crafting section, but this claw can be very expensive to get a fracture on, so do be very cautious when you're approaching this craft and be ready to spend upwards of 40 divines if you're unlucky. Next, you want to craft a shield. Ideally, you can get element immunity, but this might come later. The implicit of max frenzy charges on shields is another thing that is more min-maxy to the late game, and this is not something that is necessary. You just want to cover your resistances and spell suppression, and potentially ailment avoidance through your shield. Same thing with body armor, resistances, suppression, and life. You are using these two pieces specifically because you have so many uniques in your build to fill all your resistances that you're going to be missing. And of course, Chaos Res is also one of those things that you could look for. As far as your amulet goes, this is a place where you can get more damage, or you can opt to look for maybe +1 cold, or you can look for more life and defensive options. This is a flexible slot. You most likely will need more intelligence, as the claws tend to need a decent chunk of intelligence in order to wield. So be on the lookout for that, and try not to use strength dexterity or just strength or dexterity pure bases. Okay, so you've got your claw set up, you've got your nice shield giving you defensives, you've got Ralakesh's and everything. What do you do now for gear? Well, there's a couple options. You can look into cluster jewels, and you can look into investing into 12 clusters if you are willing to spend the points or if you need to cover resistances through those. Or you can potentially look to get plus frenzy bases in the form of a shield and a ring. Now, these are going to be a lot more difficult to come by. They're extremely expensive. The shield is better. The ring right now, I think, is sitting at anywhere from 150 to 180 divines for the cheaper ones, and the higher item level ones are sitting closer to 300 divines. This is an endgame min-maxing option, and losing one frenzy charge isn't the biggest deal. An alternative budget option to this is you can buy a unique ring, one of these synthesis rings that have a plus frenzy, and this can range anywhere from 12 divines to 30 divines based on what ring you're going to get. This is also a nice place you can get reservation efficiency to maybe fit other auras like Flesh and Stone, though I haven't really played around with this as I don't think it's really worth it. It is an option nonetheless. However, I will be now moving into the Endgame Gear, which is what I'm using now. Alright, so for the Claw, we're going to want a good bit of flat added cold damage. The actual stats that we want to roll for are going to be attack speed, crit chance, crit multi, as high tier as possible, but you can settle depending on your currency stack. You also want Elipen, and crafted hits can't be evaded. This is your ideal Claw, besides the fact that I have the Eye Gouger. You want to get this on an Imperial Claw because the attacks per second is 0.1 higher. As far as your helmet goes, a Heat Shiver is going to be your best option. The nice corruptions that you can get on this are either socketed gems have a 90% mana multiplier, which may allow you to fit in another aura, or you can get +2 aura, +2 AoE, or +2 cold. I do think cold is the best option as it gives you +2 on your Bone Chill, your Skitterbots, as well as your Herald of Ice skills. So this is actually a relatively unknown option. I managed to snag this for really cheap. The shield, the best item that you can get in this slot is a +1 Frenzy Shield, and you're going to be using this slot to essentially fill whatever resistances or get more damage. Probably one of the best places to get Avoid Ailments instead of having to get the prefix on your body armor. As far as the Amulet goes, I think that getting +1 cold might be worth noting. I haven't actually tested this completely, but I do think it is a viable option. I got Fractured Life to craft with because I was essence spamming for crit multi. Because I wanted to spare some other sources of crit chance, I decided to get it on the Amulet, and obviously Chaos Res is something that I wanted to get capped as well. The melee damage and melee strike range is a quality of life thing. It's not necessary. You can get damage while leeching as a craft instead. Alternatively, instead of the non-channeling, you can also craft leeching through the bench. Now, as far as the body armor goes, you want to look for some of the newer bases for armor evasion. Conquest Lamella is a really good one. You can get some crazy defensives from this. You can get upwards of 3k even. However, I was just rolling this with Essences of Greed. I know you can get T1 from this, but I just needed to craft something that was usable. Obviously, this is not that great of a chess piece, but it does the job. The spell suppression is the most important thing because I'm lacking suppression from other sources. I also got additional fizz damage reduction. This is a really powerful mod because it's just a flat-up additional amount of reduction. So it just adds on to this number, which is really, really powerful if you already have a lot of armor. On top of that, if you don't decide to roll life on this body armor, you can always take the Life Mastery, which gives you 15% increased max life if you have no life modifiers on your body armor. Do keep in mind, life regen does count. So, Eldritch Implicits on this item, you really want Fortify, and you really want Gain Endurance Charge every 13 seconds. This is because when we gain an Endurance Charge with Arn's Anguish and Relikesh's, we gain a Brutal Charge instead, and this allows you to get up to 11 just standing around if you have all the Frenzy Gear items. So as far as the ring goes, the endgame option is going to be a +1 Frenzy Ring. If you can get this at item level 84, that means you can hit T1 reses. Otherwise, just settle for anything above 72. I don't think that's nearly as important as just getting the +1 Frenzy to begin with. Now, how you actually want to craft this, in my opinion, is you want to spam Essences of Horror on it for the 4 to 7 added cold damage per frenzy charge. An alternative option is crit multi. You can also do that. However, this lets you fill more resistances as it gives you one more slot to roll for suffixes. However, I'm primarily looking for the reses here. then I can like lock prefix, and if I need to reroll reses, I can always just reroll an element and look for resistances that way. I'll go into more detail about like crafting this and getting the flat damage on, but besides that, +1 maximum frenzy charges is just gonna give us a lot more damage on our build. This ring itself gives me around, I think, like anywhere from 18 to 20% of my damage. Calandra's Touch, obviously, then, is very important. You don't want to spend 200 divines on 2 rings. It's much better just to get a Calandra's Touch. And instead, you can also run a Synthesized Ring if that fits your build better. However, if you are able to craft the cold damage per frenzy charge and you're actually able to kit this ring out, it's going to give you a lot more damage just running a Calandra's Touch. This item is around like 9.5 div to 10 div, so it's really worthwhile if you are going to run that. Obviously, as we've stated as well, Relic Caches and Patience. This is a non-negotiable item. Just get this. Arn's Anguish, I don't think there's a better belt. Mage Blood is like arguable, but I think with the Flasks nerf to attack speed, there's just no point in running a Mage Blood for this build. The setup does perfectly fine without it, and you're going to feel pretty zoomy with Whirling Blades anyways. Run Arn's Anguish, it gives you a lot of damage, I promise. And lastly, as far as this glove slot goes, you want +1 maximum frenzy charges. Southbound is your other option besides Admirals. You really want the +3 on this if possible, but if you can't get +3 and you can settle for +2 or +1 for cheaper, that is an option. The +1 frenzy, again, is going to scale our defensives as well as our offensives, so please do keep that in mind if you are going to skimp out on that implicit. Okay, so one thing to note about these gloves as well is that I don't believe it's a bug, but it is potentially a sort of like missed line or something. But you can actually generate rage on hit without any rage generation sources when you have these gloves on. The line of chance to that if you would gain rage on a hit to instead gain max rage just applies, so you just get rage. This means we're pretty much at permanently 30 rage whenever we're attacking something, so yeah, that's why these pair of gloves have shot up in price and are just so powerful. Alright, let's go into crafting the items. I'm going to start out with the claw, as that is going to be probably the first thing you actually craft very intensely. So with this claw, you're going to be looking primarily for the added cold damage fracture. You don't want any other fracture, really. They're a lot harder to craft on. You could craft on a crit multi, crit chance, attack speed one. However, that's going to rely on you selling the claws that you craft that you can't use, because you end up with something like Tri-Alley, as you're going to be spamming like Hatred Essences. Would not recommend that method. Getting a fracture for this prefix is much better. Again, ideally get it on a claw that has a good critical strike chance, as you can read on the line, and a good base attacks per second, anything 1.5 and above, in my opinion. So, once you get your base claw, you are going to spam Essences of Zeal on it, preferably T1. I crafted this claw super early on, so I was being budget, and I found that it just carries me here anyways. Spam Zeals until you hit crit chance and crit multi. You really want to hit both of these mods at least T2. If you can get capped crit chance without T2, then sure, that's fine. More crit multi is always more damage. And once you hit these, you want to lock your suffixes. And you ideally also don't have any prefixes. You suffix lock, and you go ahead and Veiled Orb. When you Veiled Orb, it'll guarantee take the suffixes modifier if you have no other prefixes. And from there on, you want to block Fizz. You block %Fizz, any of them is fine, and you unveil. You want to look for Elemental Resistance Pen. After you hit that, craft on His Can't Be Evaded, and you're done. The enchant for this weapon, I've seen, if you get 6% attack speed, it's slightly ahead. However, the runes to actually enchant that are extremely expensive. And not only that, it can roll anywhere from 3 to 6%, so you're going to be gambling there. But if you want to perfect a claw, then that might be a better option. Other than that, you can just get the flat added cold damage for a lot more reasonable price. It's like close to a divine still, but it's really just a one-time thing. The range isn't nearly as punishing. The shield and the body armor. So with both of these, for the shield, if you're going to be crafting a budget option without the frenzy charges, try to get a T1 life fracture on it. and spam whatever essences that you need to spam on that, whether it be Chaos Res or Cold Res or whatever you need. But if you are crafting on a Frenzy Charge shield, I think the best option here is still just to spam either Essences of Life, so the Greed Essences, or if you need a specific attribute like Intelligence, like I needed, you can spam Int Essences and pray that you hit Avoid Ailments and Life. Or you can hit Avoid Ailments and a Resist, then lock Suffixes and Reforge Life. This is a pretty expensive option, but it is one that I decided to go with. Ended up hitting and settling on T5 Life. Not happy with it, but it does the job. I don't really need any more because recrafting this would be a pain. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and either risk a 50-50 or just slam and craft on Gain Cold as extra chaos and you're done. However, if you want to risk the 50-50 to potentially delete your life and have to go back to reforging, you can Suffix Lock, and from there you Veiled Orb, and hope that you hit Flat Cold, and whatever other flat elemental, doesn't really matter. And if you do hit that, then you'll get a shield like this, and then you can craft on again that cold damage is chaos. Meanwhile, with your chest piece, your body armor is going to kind of depend again on what you need. You can either roll Chaos Essences, you can roll Greed Essences, and those two I think are going to be the premium ones to roll. And when you're rolling for those, you just want to be looking out for potential crafts that you can either annul for or exalt. Look primarily for suppression. You really only have two sources of suppression on your gear, so be sure to either fill it on your shield or your body armor. Alright, so as far as the ring goes, not going to get too into it, it's really simple. Essences of Horror spam until you hit the T1 life prefix, and if you have empty prefix slot, you can maybe fish for the flat damage. If you need non-channeling, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't Veiled Orb, I would just, block a prefix and slam till you hit reses, or prefix lock and reforge res, hope that you don't fill your prefix. The Amulet, on the other hand, you can get Fractured, either Chaos or Life. If you can get Fractured +1 Cold, that's an option as well. Then you're just going to spam Deafening Essences of Scorn for T1 crit multi. Once you get the suffixes that you want, you can Veiled Orb for a mod, block, and unveil. Or you can look to just settle on whatever you want. You don't need to spend the Veiled Orb if you don't want to, and just craft non-channeling or damage with leeching if you don't need the mana economy. Alright, let's move on to the jewels. Now, I decided to take a sort of more alternative option. Because I didn't really have that many suffixes to work with on my gear and I wanted to get more damage, I went for 12-node clusters. Obviously, I'm not using all 12 nodes. It's a little inefficient, but I do think it gets the job done nonetheless. So I have Chaos Res and Lightning Res on this one. This gives me 6% Chaos Res and 9% Lightning Res per node, as well as 16% Claw attack damage. And on top of that, you get 2 jewel sockets at the end of it, which is really nice. This has 2 more jewel sockets than most of the other setups for this build, but some people are running 2 clusters, so kind of depends on who you're looking at. Either way, as far as these go, if you can ideally hit Life, Chaos Res, and one other Res, that's going to be your best bet, or Life, Chaos Res, and one other attribute that you need, like Intelligence. That's the only time I would ever run these 12-node passives. Obviously, you want the 35% effect. No settling on 25%. Look for 35%. You can alt spam for these or just chaos spam if you're really lazy. Gonna be an expensive craft. You can also look to fracture. I am traumatized from fracturing these, so I will never do that again. But if you wish to, go for it. It is an option, and it will make crafting them a lot easier if you can hit the 35% node. Okay, so as far as jewels go, Ancestral Vision is very strong. You're going to get 50% ailment avoidance just because your spell suppress capped. And that's going to be huge because you can combine that with your shield and these 4 nodes, and that will give you 100%. Your shield needs to have at least 30% ailment avoidance, which I believe is maximum roll T2. As far as a Watcher's Eye goes, you don't actually need a Watcher's Eye for this build. The only reason I'm taking this is because I don't have the extra prefix on my ring to get non-channeling, and so I'm getting non-channeling cost through a Watcher's Eye, and I'm running Clarity, so I can actually maximally sustain my Frostblades just in the open. Also, the 55% attack damage with precision is another mod that I look for. You can get crit multi with precision or attack speed with precision. Ideally, if you can get double precision, that's going to be the best Watcher's Eye. Those are going to be really expensive. This one was relatively cheap, I think a couple divines, so definitely an option that I more took opportunistically. As far as actual rare jewels go, try to look for 4 mods if you can. Obviously, easier said than done. But try to get at least double crit multi and 1 other damage mod. And if you can get life as the 4th mod, that's great. If not, get life as a 3rd mod, and 4th mod is just flex. Whether you need resistances or attributes. But again, double crit multi because this build is scaling crit. A very good lethal pride is also notable. If you have a good lethal pride, it can give you a lot of damage. The one I'm taking right now is currently giving me 30% melee crit chance, 4% life, 15 crit multi, another 4% life, and 10% chance to intimidate. I think intimidate's really important. I don't have any double damage on this currently, so if you do find one with like intimidate and double damage, definitely go for that. But melee crit multi is not bad at all either, and obviously any source of life is just additionally a cherry on the cake. Okay, let's go over the gem links really quickly. So on my claw, I have Steel Skin, Automation, more duration. Steel Skin is going to be our primary guard skill. This is going to be up a good majority of the time. If I do have it up while I'm full charges, I can actually tank Uber Shaper Slam, which is pretty cool. But if not, then yeah, it's not the most consistent way. You can choose to play this manually instead on bosses if you'd like. I'm just lazy, so I don't do that. Herald of Ice for clearing and the base damage is really nice. And Herald of Ice is just such a cool skill. It always feels great. I think it adds a sort of pseudo bit of damage, if you will. Precision Aura for a little bit of extra crit chance at the cost of very little mana. I think this is worth it. The accuracy is a non-factor unless you need it earlier. Skitterbots allows us to have a source of shocking the enemy, more so than anything, and giving us Bone Chill will also give the enemies a cold damage taken debuff, which is good for our build. As far as travel skills go, I like to take Flame Dash and Whirling Blades, faster attacks. I don't think there's a better movement skill than Whirling Blades, in my honest opinion. Shield Charge is good and all, but this skill is just better. You can take Frostblink here as well if you like to animation cancel. So with Whirling Blades, you can Whirling Blades, but the Flame Dash takes a cast time. Meanwhile, Frostblink, you can Frostblink right away. So it's a little bit faster, I'd say, for just getting long distances, but you won't really notice much of a difference. Enhance and Blood Rage is really nice just to give you a little bit of extra attack speed, as that is the additional quality effect. As far as my curse setup goes, I'm running Assassin's Mark, which gives me a lot of crit chance and crit multi against the enemy. And on top of that, when I'm killing rares and maps, it gives me a lot of life and mana recovery. So yeah, that's not too much of a tidbit, it's just more damage. And before you get your wallet caches, you can get power charges on hit through the quality of Assassin's Mark, so do look out for that, as power charges are kind of nice for this build as well. Mark on hit, obviously, just so I don't have to manually cast it. And Clarity here is just for the Watcher's Eye, but it does let me sustain my mana. Enduring Cry is a very important thing to note. You still need to play this even later on. A lot of people I've seen had missed this. You need Enduring Cry to generate your charges outside of your chest piece. Obviously, you can just wait for them to generate here. You can gain Endurance Charge on melee stun, all of that stuff. But I think still the best option really is to play Enduring Cry. 2 Enduring Cries gets me up to 10, if not 11. And that's plenty enough for bosses. Even getting 5 to start out with makes the ramp time a lot faster for the overall damage output. So yeah, play Enduring Charge, get close to a boss, press it, and you'll get charges. So I have a Whirling Blade set up. This is for someone who wants to run Reflect maps if you have Awakened Ellie damage. Run Brutality. It's going to get rid of all your elemental damage on Whirling Blade, so you don't have to worry about dying to Reflect, because it does a lot of damage since you have so much cold attack. You'll be killing yourself with Reflect if you aren't careful. Rage support here gives me more attack speed if I have at least 10 rage, so in mapping, this just means my Whirling Blades is much faster. Ups the mana cost, but it costs 3 mana because I have enough minus mana from non-channeling, so yeah. Now, onto the main thing. Frostblades of Katabasis is the primary skill, obviously. We are going to be playing this alternate quality because it leaves a ground effect, which helps us kill things with Southbound. However, it's also got a nice little tidbit where it has a very long reach. Like, I can hit bosses from here, and I can hit them where my Skitterbot's icon is. I think in some of the clips you could see, like, for instance, Shaper stuff, I'm, like, maximum range hitting them. It basically turns this skill into a range skill, which is pretty cool. Ice Bite is our main source of damage scaling. You don't want to swap this out ever. It gives us cold damage per frenzy charge, and this is going to be really important. Get a 2120 if you can as soon as possible. It just gives you more added flat damage. Now, increased critical strike support can be swapped out for increased crit damage if you have enough crit chance, or you can play something else entirely here, like Inspiration if you really need mana economy. But I do recommend playing increased crit strikes as it just alleviates getting crit chance from other places on your tree. LA damage with attack support, as well as Awaken Cold damage support, are kind of the up-in-the-air options. So instead of Wed, you can play Inspiration here if you need more crit, or if you just need more mana economy. I don't like having to roll over Reflect maps. They give you a decent bit of quantity on maps, so I will run that. And this is technically a little bit more damage from what I see. And Awaken added cold damage is actually a huge boost to your damage because flat added cold damage is overall a lot more powerful this league due to the removal of the base from Frostblades. Not Katabasis, but just general Frostblades. But because, in order to compensate for that, they added more effectiveness of added damage. And so that's where the value of flat damage comes in. On top of that, you also get +1 to supported cold skill gems, which again boosts this effectiveness of added damage. You can see if we take this out, the effectiveness goes down literally 100%. So yeah, gem levels actually matter for attack skills now. Multi-strike support, I couldn't farm up an Awaken multi-strike anymore. Like, I just ran out of time, so that's going to be the next upgrade option for this build. It's going to be Awaken multi-strike. And yeah, you want to get that gem, but otherwise just play multi-strike. This is, again, not really a changeable option. It just makes the skill feel a lot better, and it actually saves you mana. Okay, let's move on to the Flasks. So there's a couple options for what you can run. Early on, before you get sources of, like, Frenzy Generation and all of that. So, again, with Frenzy Generation, you want to take this Mastery and 10% chance to gain Frenzy Charge when you hit your marked enemy. With Assassin's Mark, that's going to give you decent Frenzy Generation. You can also play Blood Rage and kill Writhing Jar Worms for more charges, though this is like a really early setup before you get Relic Caches. For right now, my setup for bossing and sort of kind of flexible Flask slots, I almost always play Tincture now because this is just such a huge damage boost. Instead of Crit Multi, you can run Ellie Pen, but yeah, this is really good to play. If you can get a higher quality one, that's always better. They're pretty expensive, but it's not too bad. Diamond Flask is just to cap crit. Even without this, I think I might be crit capped, but I don't really care. You can run something else here if you are crit capped. A Bottle of Faith is also an option, or you can run defensive options like Jade Flask or Granite Flask. Silver Flask because we don't really have any of those sources of Onslaught, so this is just going to give us 20%. Attack speed, cast speed, move speed. The Quicksilver Flask is also interchangeable for a Sulfur Flask because Whirling Blades is so damn fast of a skill. You're going to be just zooming around anyways, so you can just take a Sulfur Flask for even more damage if you're doing stuff like Invitations where you want to kill single targets faster. So, as far as the actual bossing goes, I'll go into that in just a little bit. But Flask swaps are something that I highly recommend players get more used to, and it's something that will overall help you improve at the game. I think it's really important to tackle each Uber kind of differently, based on, you know, how you play, but also based on what is probably a better option for the Uber. Alright guys, this is going to be my last video for a decent bit of time. I am going back to school for my master's degree, and this is going to take up the majority of my focus and time, so I'm going to take a step away from gaming in general. If I do post anything, it probably won't be gaming related, more so life related, but yeah, I'm taking priorities in a different direction for the time being. Anyways, I hope that this video, as well as my other guides, have been entertaining or have helped out in some way or another. YouTube has been a lot of fun, and after just getting partnered, I think it's really been something that I like to put some focus in. And I may make content in the future more related to medical, because that's the field that I'm looking into. But nevertheless, hope you guys enjoyed my video. Until next time, ciao.